"Stay," she said. "My flight can wait." It was 4 o'clock in the morning at Gate F-12 at O'Hare International Airport. There was snow on the tarmac, 42 empty chairs in our gate area, and 11 hours between us and when we were supposed to have met each other. None of that seemed to register at the time. That is where the story ends up. What I have never been able to explain cleanly is where it starts, which is the same gate, the same row of black vinyl chairs, at 11:17 p.m. on a Tuesday in November, when a snowstorm from Canada had grounded half the evening flights out of Chicago, and I was not paying attention to anyone. My name is Daniel Marsh. I'm 33 years old. I work in freight logistics, the kind of job that, at most social gatherings, requires explaining what freight logistics actually means, followed immediately by the moment the person you're explaining it to locates someone more interesting across the room, which is fair. I coordinate supply chains for an industrial equipment supplier out of Columbus, Ohio. I travel 4, maybe 5 times a year, always on the same 3 apps, always window seat, always with a podcast I'm 6 episodes behind on and never finish. I am not, by any measurable standard, someone things happen to in airports. That night I was supposed to be on the 9:45 p.m. to Denver for an industry conference that started at 8 the following morning. The storm came in from the north without apology and without a timeline anyone found useful, and by 10 o'clock the departures board was read from top to bottom. The gate agents were distributing hotel vouchers with the practiced calm of people who have made peace with this particular failure many times and no longer feel bad about it. I didn't take one. My rescheduled flight left at 6:15 a.m., which made a hotel mathematically pointless. I found the least uncomfortable seat at Gate F-12, went to the terminal shop for the largest coffee available, and settled in for however long this was going to take. She sat down at 11:20. 3 seats from me, not the seat directly beside mine, not the seat across, but 3 down, in a gate area offering 42 alternatives. I noticed her the way you notice anyone who chooses proximity in a half-empty terminal after midnight, briefly, without much investment. She had a carry-on that was clearly 1 centimeter too large for any overhead bin she was going to attempt, a canvas tote bag with a fabric patch sewn to the front in a language I didn't recognize, and a worn hardcover book she opened immediately to page 47, where a sticky note jutted out at a sharp angle, like a bookmark someone had placed in a hurry and never adjusted. She read without looking up for 8 minutes. I know it was 8 because I kept checking the departures board, and it hadn't changed. Then, her phone rang. She answered in a low voice, listened, and said 5 words so quietly they had no business reaching me. But the terminal had gone still in the way it goes after midnight, the particular quiet of people who have accepted their situation, and I heard all of them. "Stay, my flight can wait." She said it once, listened again, smiled at something returned on the other end. A small, private smile that happened before she decided whether to allow it, and then she hung up and went back to page 47. I went back to the departures board. 35 minutes passed. Neither of us said anything. Then she looked up, turned toward me with the directness of someone who has thought about what they're going to say, and decided to say it, and asked whether the gate shop still had anything worth eating. I told her the sandwiches were gone, but the trail mix wasn't actively offensive. She considered this with the gravity it did not deserve. Then, she said, "Trail mix it is," stood up, and asked me to watch her things. She came back 12 minutes later with trail mix, a coffee, and a second coffee that she set on the armrest between our seats, without asking whether I wanted it. When I looked at it, and then at her, she shrugged. "You look like the first one wasn't working." Her name was Nora Sellen. She was a graphic designer from Austin, flying home from a client presentation in Chicago that had run 2 days longer than planned. She described the client in a tone that communicated measured devastation without naming a single specific grievance. The language, I recognized, of someone who has learned to be competent around people who don't always deserve it. She'd had 3 separate rescheduled departures canceled tonight. She had made the decision, she told me, with the particular stillness of someone announcing something medical, to stop catastrophizing about it. "What are you doing instead?" I asked. She held up the hardcover. "Reading page 47. You were on page 47 when you sat down." She looked at me sidelong. "It's a very long page. I have poor survival instincts around women who say exactly what they mean. We talk the way strangers do in airports after midnight, without the usual architecture of normal conversation, without anyone trying to be impressive, without the specific performance that daylight hours require of everyone." She had grown up in Ankara and come to Austin at 22 for a graduate design program and simply never left. She missed Turkish bread and the quality of October light and nothing else, she said, except when all of it arrived at once and she missed everything simultaneously. She had a cat whose name she preferred not to say in public because it was embarrassing. She had a precise and non-negotiable hierarchy for trail mix components that placed pretzels last under every conceivable circumstance. She asked about Columbus, and I gave her the honest version, which took about 90 seconds and did not flatter the city. She laughed at something I said about shipping routes, a real laugh, surprised out of her before she decided to give it, and then looked away too quickly, like the laugh had been more than she meant to offer. That bothered me more than it should have. Around 1 in the morning, the terminal found its overnight register. Quieter, stranger, more honest than airports usually allow themselves to be. The overhead lights dimmed to a lower setting. The gate agent disappeared. Somewhere in the B concourse, a maintenance cart moved between rows of chairs with a rhythmic squeak that became its own kind of company. Nora set the hardcover spine down on her knee, still page 47, and looked at the floor-to-ceiling windows where the snow was still moving in clean horizontal lines across the orange-lit tarmac. "Do you think weather is the only honest thing left?" she asked. I said I thought the weather was specifically trying to destroy both of us tonight. "Yes," she said. Exactly. I didn't have a response to that. I was beginning to understand, not going to have a response to most of what Nora Selland said, and this was going to be a specific kind of problem that I didn't have a clean name for yet. I told myself it was the hour. That this was what happened when you trapped reasonable adults in fluorescent space after midnight. A kind of accidental intimacy, contextual and temporary. The conversational equivalent of people becoming friends on long flights. I told myself I was being courteous, that anyone with basic decency would have kept talking to her. I did not tell myself that I had stopped checking the departures board 90 minutes ago and hadn't noticed until she mentioned her rescheduled flight had posted. At some point after midnight, she'd shown me the patch on the tote bag. It said something in Turkish, 3 words, dark thread on cream canvas, and when I asked what it meant, she looked at it for a moment with the expression of someone deciding how much of the translation to give. She said it was from a poem. That it meant something close to the door you did not open is still a door. She said she had sewn it on herself, badly, after a year she didn't like to describe at dinner parties, and that she kept meaning to replace it with something less earnest and hadn't gotten around to it. I said I didn't think she should replace it. She looked at me for a second longer than felt neutral. Then she looked at the book. That was the first time I understood that something was happening that I was not going to be able to categorize cleanly later. The 4th attempt at getting her home was listed at 4:15 am, departing from gate F-17. It populated on the board at 2:48. She saw it before I did. She looked at the board, then at the sticky note on page 47, and said nothing for a moment. "That's yours?" I asked. "That's mine." She recrossed her ankles, calculating. "I have until 3:30. We had, I noticed, 45 minutes I had not counted on. I didn't examine this observation carefully. I blamed it on the coffee. She went back to the book, actually read, this time, or appeared to. I watched her without watching her the way you do when you've been in a room with someone long enough that watching feels permitted and you haven't quite named why. She had a habit of pressing her thumbnail against her bottom lip when something on the page held her attention. A habit of going still just before she laughed, like the laugh needed a moment to collect itself first. The tote bag's front pocket had been unzipped all evening, and the fabric patch on the front was sewn on slightly crooked, like someone had added it after the fact, without a ruler. She'd mentioned a project she'd been avoiding. A restaurant logo for a client in East Austin who kept changing what kind of restaurant they wanted to be, which she described as an emotional problem, wearing the costume of a design problem. I said most of what people hired me to fix were logistics failures disguising the exact same thing. Someone who had not yet made a decision. She'd looked at me then with the attention of someone who wants to think about something later and is filing it away now. "Does that frustrate you?" she asked. "Usually, but not always." I thought about it. When someone finally commits to a direction, even a difficult one, there's always this moment right after where they look relieved, like they've been holding something heavy and just set it down. I paused. I liked being there for that part. She had been quiet after that for a moment, looking at the book. Her thumbnail moved to her lip. At one point she went back to the shop for water and came back with 2 bottles, handing me one without asking. The way you hand something to a person you have already decided belongs in the same general radius as you. I noticed this. I noticed it and filed it under nothing specific and did not retrieve it again for another hour, which is precisely the kind of careful inattention I had spent my 30s developing into an art form. She asked me once, somewhere after 2, what I actually liked about the job. Not the diplomatic version, the actual version. Nobody asks the actual version. I told her the truth, which was that I liked the moment a shipping problem resolved, not the paperwork, not the credit, but the specific instant when 14 moving pieces that were behaving incorrectly suddenly clicked into a configuration that worked, and every person waiting on the other end of that chain got what they needed. I told her it was a small thing, and I was aware it was a small thing. She said, "That's not small." She said it like a correction. Like I had mislabeled something that she had a more accurate name for. I did not have a response to that either. This was becoming a pattern. At 3:20, she closed the hardcover on page 47 and slid it into the tote. "Still not 48?" I asked. She looked at me. "I know how it ends," she said. "I've known since about the 3rd page. I keep reading the same one because..." She stopped. She looked at the tote, then back at me, in the way of someone who has said more than they plan, because I like knowing it's still going to end the way I think it will. The sentence settled into the quiet between us. Neither of us reached for it. At 3:35, the gate was called. She stood. She put on her jacket, slowly, in the manner of someone aware of each step in a process. She picked up the tote. She picked up the carry-on that was 1 centimeter too large. She stood there with both bags and looked at the board, then at the gate, then at the snow outside the windows that had slowed to something barely there. I stood too, because someone was leaving and being upright for it seemed right. The terminal was very quiet. The snow had nearly stopped. The tarmac lights were making soft orange halos in the wet air, and the gate area was still mostly empty, and for 2 or 3 paragraphs of silence, neither of us said anything. There was something in the quality of that quiet that was different from earlier. Earlier it had been the quiet of strangers who hadn't started talking yet. This was the quiet of 2 people who had talked for 5 hours and were now approaching the part of the night where the conversation has to become something else or it has to end. I watched her look at the gate. I watched her not move toward it. She shifted the carry-on from one hand to the other. I thought, this is the part where it ends. This is where 2 strangers at an airport say it was nice talking to you, and mean it, genuinely, and go their separate ways, and remember the night for a few days, and then stop. I thought, that's a clean ending. That's a reasonable ending. That is what happens. She put the carry-on down. I could have taken the 220, she said. She was looking at the gate, not at me. They posted it for about 15 minutes before it filled. I was right here. I saw it. The terminal held its breath. I decided, she said quietly, that it seemed rushed. Her voice when she said it was level. Her fingers on the tote strap were not. She looked at me, and then she said it. The same 5 words, the same low register, and this time they were aimed directly at me. Stay, she said. My flight can wait. I went still, not politely still. The kind of still where every physical thing registers at once. The vinyl of the chair against the backs of my knees, the coffee cup in my hand, the slight orange cast from the tarmac windows on everything in the terminal, the particular quality of her voice when she said it. Like a decision already made, being stated. Something in my chest shifted, not dramatically, just enough. I set the coffee down. Nora, I looked at her. You should go. Your flight, there's a 9 a.m. She said it without looking away. Her voice was steady. I looked it up about an hour ago. It gets me home by noon. I just need to know that there's... She stopped. Started again. That there's a reason to stay. I looked at her for a long moment, at the tote with its off-center patch, at the book in the side pocket, spine out, still on 47, the sticky note still visible, at the way she was standing there at 4 in the morning with both bags in her hands, watching me with the particular steadiness of someone who has made a decision and is waiting to see whether it lands. Every person I've made plans with in the last several years, I said. Every good thing on the calendar, conferences, trips, weekends. When they ended, I went back to a list in my head. Things I was still waiting to care about. A tally of things I hadn't gotten to yet. I paused. I haven't checked that list once tonight. Not since you asked me about the trail mix. She made a sound that was almost a laugh, but not quite. Something more careful than that, and more deliberate. That is a fairly romantic origin point, she said. I'm in freight logistics, I said. This is genuinely the best I have. She laughed then, the real one, the one that surprised her out of herself, and reached across and put her hand briefly over mine, testing whether something was real. Her fingers went still. The room went still. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. She looked at me. She had the expression of a woman who finds the universe's timing structurally offensive. It's my cat's vet. At 4 a.m. He's been eating table food again. This is apparently an ongoing concern. She held up one finger, answered, had 30 seconds of conversation that ended with, I know, I'm aware, it's complicated, and hung up. Is the cat dramatic? She said. The cat is dramatic. She set the phone face down on the seat. She sat back down, not 3 seats away, next to mine. She put the tote bag on the floor between her feet. There's a 9 a.m., she said again, a little quieter. I know. She looked at me. And you're still here. I am. Outside, the snow had stopped entirely, and the tarmac was clean and still and lit warm and orange, and the departures board behind us was updating in slow, patient increments toward morning, and the gate area was quiet, and she was looking at me with the specific expression of a woman who said a true thing out loud and is waiting to see what it does. Okay, I said. She made it to Austin on the 9 o'clock. I made it to Denver with 40 minutes before the conference opened, which I attended with the specific inattention of a man whose mind is still in gate F12 at O'Hare, on a loop, not minding the loop at all. I texted her from the second panel of the morning. She texted back a photo of the terminal at sunrise, taken from gate F17, captioned, still on page 47. 3 weeks later, I routed a work trip through Austin on a flight path that was, professionally speaking, about 200 miles from efficient. She met me at the airport, just dinner in the terminal. 2 hours that moved too quickly. When I walked toward security, she stood at the barrier and watched until I was through, which was either something you did because you liked someone or something you did because the light at that hour was good. And I decided to believe both were true. By February, she had a standing reason to visit Columbus. By April, she had a drawer in my apartment and a very fixed opinion about which cabinet the coffee mugs belonged in, which conflicted with mine, and which I found I did not mind. The carry-on that was 1 centimeter too large lived in my hallway closet for the better part of a year before either of us mentioned it. 2 years later, when people ask how we met, she says we were stranded at the same airport, and I was the only person nearby who seemed to know anything about trail mix. I tell them she sat down 3 seats from me with 40 empty alternatives, and then didn't explain why for the next 5 hours. We both say this is more or less the whole story. Neither of us mentions that she could have taken an earlier flight, or that she chose to stay, or that she said 5 words at 4 in the morning that she had said once before, to someone else on the phone, before she knew what they were really for. That part is ours. What would you have done if a stranger at the airport said stay instead of goodbye? And have you ever let something go? A flight, a plan, a safe exit. Not because you had to, but because you weren't ready for the moment to be over. Tell me your story in the comments. If you liked this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.